Welcome back to the deep dive. Our mission, as always, is to take these really critical, sometimes very dense technical advisories and just boil them down into the essential knowledge you can actually use. And today, we're wading deep into enterprise security. We're looking at the SAP Security Patch Day for January 2026.
That's right. And this isn't just about reading off a list of CVEs. It's about understanding the real immediate business risk behind them.
Exactly.
SAP dropped 17 new security notes on January 13th. And, while that's a lot, the real story, the place any security team needs to focus, is on the 4 flaws they've labeled critical.
Right. So we're not talking about minor bugs here.
No, not at all. These are fixes for vulnerabilities that could let attackers run their own code, manipulate financial records, or even just take over entire monitoring systems. Serious stuff.
It's really the difference between a leaky faucet and a pipe bursting in your server room. Our goal today is to look at these 4 critical flaws, 2 of them scoring almost a perfect 10, and figure out, which one do you patch first and why.
And we're talking about SQL injection, remote code execution.
All the big ones. And some of these are authenticated, but the really scary part is that some are unauthenticated attack sectors.
Yep.
Okay, let's unpack this by starting with the easiest way in.
I think that's the right place to start. When you talk about immediate external risk, you have to begin with the flaw that requires 0 interaction and 0 credentials. That's CVE-2026-0500.
Okay.
This is a critical remote code execution vulnerability and RCE, and it's in the SAP Wily Introscope Enterprise Manager. Scored a CVSS of 9.6. Very, very high.
So for listeners who aren't, in the weeds of SAP admin every day, what is Wily Introscope and why is an RCE there so concerning?
Well, you can think of Introscope as the central nervous system for performance monitoring across a huge SAP landscape. It's the tool that, keeps the lights on. It's watching CPU loads, database health.
The big picture.
The big picture, exactly. So if an attacker gets RCE on Introscope, they aren't just hitting one server. They are potentially landing with system-level access on the very infrastructure that's designed to oversee the entire environment.
Yeah.
And what's fascinating here is just how low the barrier to entry is for an attacker.
Right.
This flaw requires minimal user interaction, and this is the key part. It enables system-level access without authentication.
So they don't need a username, a password, anything. They just walk right in.
They just walk right in. It affects version 10.8 deployments, and an attacker can use it as this silent backdoor to just sit there, observe, and then pivot to compromise other connected systems. And they can do it all without ever having to log into the main SAP application.
So, okay, we've established the 9.6 RCE in Introscope is the most urgent external threat. It's an unauthenticated system-level takeover that's a huge risk to confidentiality, availability, everything. Now, let's pivot to the flaw that somehow scored even higher, a 9.9. This one, you said, requires authentication, but it seems to target the absolute core of the business.
It really does. We're moving from the monitoring system right into the financial data. The 9.9 vulnerability is CVE 2026-0501. It's a massive SQL injection vulnerability in SAP S/4HANA's General Ledger module.
Okay.
And from an integrity risk perspective, this is unlike almost anything else.
We hear about SQL injection all the time, but why is it so damaging specifically in the general ledger? What does that actually mean for a business?
Well, SQL injection means an attacker can basically break the application's rules and talk directly to the database in its own language.
So they're bypassing all the normal checks and balances.
Completely. And in the general ledger module, the component that manages all corporate accounting, that is catastrophic. Now, it does require an authenticated attacker. Maybe someone who stole credentials or a malicious insider.
Right.
But once they're in, they can execute arbitrary SQL queries. They can just completely bypass all the application controls that are there to ensure financial data is accurate.
So the risk isn't just that they can steal data, it's that they can change it and make it look like it was a legitimate transaction.
Precisely. That's the nightmare scenario. An attacker could alter balances, change transaction records, or just destroy data in a way that is incredibly difficult to spot during a normal audit.
Wow.
It directly compromises the integrity of a company's financial records, which, as you can imagine, is a massive regulatory and legal headache.
And which versions are we talking about here?
This one specifically impacts S/4HANA versions 102 through 109, and it affects both private cloud and on-premise deployments.
So when you're prioritizing, you're weighing this unauthenticated RCE total control against this 9.9 authenticated SQL, which is, total financial fraud potential.
They both demand immediate attention. It's a tough call, but both have to be at the very top of the list.
Okay, so we've covered the two highest priority flaws. The 9.6 is the open front door. The 9.9 is the attack on the bank vault from the inside. But SAP flagged 4 critical flaws. What are the other 2?
So now we move into what you could call a purely internal threat model. We have 2 separate code injection flaws, both scoring a CVSS of 9.1. One is CVE 2026-0498 in SAP S4 HANA, and the other is CVE 2026-0491 in SAP Landscape Transformation.
And what's the crucial detail with these?
The crucial difference here is that while the potential damage is absolutely critical, we're talking malicious code execution, they both require high privilege authentication.
That's a really key distinction. So we're not defending against some random hacker on the internet here. We're talking about defending against like an insider who already has the digital keys to the executive suite.
Exactly. These aren't your primary entry points. An attacker isn't likely to use these first. They're what we'd call post-compromise tools.
Okay, so they get in some other way, and then they use this.
Right. An attacker exploits a weaker flaw to get initial access, and then they use a high-privilege code injection like this to cement their position, to expand their capabilities, maybe write new programs or malicious backdoors deep inside the system.
The high-severity landscape doesn't even stop there, right? There were other serious flaws that an attacker would use once they're already inside the network.
Right.
What else was in that CVSS 8 range?
Yeah, we're looking at dedicated tools for escalation and command execution. Take CVE 2026-0492. It's a privilege escalation vulnerability in the SAP HNA database, scoring an 8.8.
So what does that let them do?
It means an attacker who has, say, medium-level access can use this flaw to instantly jump up to full database administrator privileges.
That is the ultimate lateral move.
It is. And then right behind that, we have CVE 2026-0507. It's an OS command injection scoring an 8.4, and it affects core application server components like ABA and the NetWeaver RFC SDK.
So if you connect all these dots, you start to see a full attack chain forming.
That's the bigger picture. These injection and escalation flaws are the heavy lifting tools. An attacker gets in via that 9.6 Introscope RCE, maybe uses a stolen credential to move into S4 HANA, and then they deploy these 8.8 and 8.4 flaws to get absolute, unrestricted access to the operating system or the database.
It's a chain of events. So the 9.6 flaw breaks the lock on the front door. The 9.9 Skilla steals the money from the vault. And these 8.8 and 8.4 flaws are the attacker finding the master key to every single room in the building.
That's a perfect analogy.
Now, we've covered the top 4 criticals and a couple of key high-severity issues, but there were 17 notes released. We can't just ignore the other 11, right? Because they're often the little loopholes that let an attacker start moving around in the first place.
Absolutely. The patch day also included some really significant fixes for authorization weaknesses. These are often forgotten, but are so critical for internal defense.
So these aren't about getting in, but about what you can do once you're there.
Exactly. They facilitate privilege escalation through authenticated pathways. We need to distinguish them from something like an RCE.
So what are some examples from this patch day?
Well, we saw 2 major authorization bypasses. First, a missing authorization check in the NetWeaver application server, ABAP. That's the foundational platform for so many SAP applications. It scored a high severity 8.1.
And that just lets a user do things they shouldn't be able to do.
Simply put, yes. And the second one was a bit lower down, but still a concern. It was in the EHS management systems, that's environmental, health, and safety, at a CVSS of 6.4.
Right.
And what these 2 flaws really highlight is that your perimeter defense doesn't matter if your internal roles are all wrong. An authorization weakness like this could mean a user with standard access to, say, HR, could potentially start viewing or changing financial data just because the system failed to check their permissions correctly.
And then we get down to the application level flaws. I mean, these might have lower scores, but they're often the most common attack surfaces because they rely on someone clicking a link.
We saw the full spectrum of client-side risk. There was cross-site scripting, XSS patched in the enterprise portal, and the business connector, both scoring a 6.1. XSS is so dangerous because it lets an attacker inject malicious code into a web page that a legitimate user is looking at.
And steal their session, their credentials.
All of it. And we also saw a whole cluster of issues that were targeting specific Fiori apps, which is the modern, user-friendly interface for SAP.
Right. What did we see there?
There were 3 notes for the Fiori Intercompany Balance Reconciliation app. For anyone who doesn't know, this app is used by finance teams to make sure transactions between different parts of a company balance out. If you compromise that data, You can introduce some really hidden manipulation into the books.
And those were lower severity.
Yeah, the notes included cross-site request forgery, CSRF, and information disclosure, both scoring around 4.3.
And it's important to remember, a 4.3 or a 4.7, like the open redirect in SAP supplier relationship management. While that seems low, it's still a real phishing risk. If you can trick a user into clicking a link that redirects them to a malicious site, that's still a successful attack.
Precisely. The CVSS score doesn't always tell the whole story of the risk. And just to show how thorough this patch day was, SAP also included fixes for things like insufficient input handling and identity management, a 3.8, and even replacing an obsolete encryption algorithm in an older component, which was a 3.0.
So it really shows that the attack surface is just vast. It goes from the newest S/4HANA systems all the way back to older components that are probably still buried deep in a company's infrastructure.
It's everywhere.
So after sifting through all 17 of these notes, from the terrifying highs to the insidious lows, the path forward seems clear, but it also seems really complex.
So what does this all mean?
It means that any organization running SAP, especially if you're on S/4HANA or using Introscope 10.8, needs to move from just being aware of this to taking action immediately. You have two existential threats to deal with right now. That 9.6 unauthenticated RCE in Introscope, that's your perimeter breach risk, and the 9.9 authenticated SQL injection in the general ledger, which is your most critical financial integrity risk. Patching those has to be the highest possible priority.
And the practical guidance here is just paramount. Organizations have to consult the SAP support portal right now. You can't just know the CVE number. You need the specific patch availability details for your specific installed versions. If you're on S4 or core versions 102 through 109, you need that general ledger patch deployed with extreme urgency.
This has been a really high-stakes deep dive into a very active threat landscape. We've covered the total control RCE, the financial integrity threat, and the whole range of internal escalation tools and user-facing weaknesses. 17 notes in one day is a massive challenge for any security team.
It absolutely is. And maybe here's a final thought for you to consider, something that builds on our discussion of those high-privilege flaws, the 9.1 code injections. We know these require high-level authenticated access, right? Which means they're mostly a threat from an insider or an external attacker who has already stolen some very powerful credentials.
Right.
So given that even the fastest patch deployment takes time, what are the essential internal security measures? Things like strict least privilege policies, mandatory MFA for high-risk users, better centralized logging. What measures must go hand in hand with that rapid patching effort to stop a privileged insider from exploiting these flaws in that critical window before the patch is fully rolled out?
That's the definition of defense in depth, isn't it?
It is, and it's something every security leader needs to be actively planning for right now.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the January 2026 SAP Security Patch Day. We really hope this knowledge helps you stay secure and well-informed.
Until next time.